maybe you would think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me, as usual, Kevin Durso. Kevin, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, we got a little bit of a different background for Kevin today, but we're making it work. It's been a couple weeks since we did a show. We've got a lot of big news that we want to talk about. We need to make sure to cram this one in before the Super Bowl in a couple hours. But in the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media at YWT Podcast. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Hit the like button over there. It helps us out. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. And we're at YWT Podcast on all the social media. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso everywhere except for Blue Sky, where it's just at Kevin Durso. So, okay, diving right into it. As we sit here recording on Super Bowl Sunday, we are at the break of the Four Nations for the Flyers. There are a couple of games left in the NHL, but the Flyers are done. It's been a couple weeks since our last show.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly where we want to start with it. There have been some ups, there have been some downs. This remains a bit of a streaky team. As we sit here at the break, they lost 4 out of their last 5, but they did end on a win. Where are we at now, Kevin?
Where they always have been.
Right in the middle, baby.
I mean, one of the things I've laughed at over the last several days is that somehow or other, I've been telling you the same message for weeks, right? Like beyond, and I know it's been a few weeks since we did a show, so like go back further. We almost named an episode the line that I've dropped several times about. It starts with half the league.
Half the league, right? Sucks. We all know it.
Okay. Yeah. The part that I'm laughing at, though, is that somehow or other, John Tortorella found a nicer way to say that than I did. Because the other day he said it's a 500 league, and that's much more accurate and just a nicer way of saying it than just coming out and saying, well, half the teams in the league suck. So, you know,
and there's been some of that sentiment for a while, just kind of regarding the 3-point system and the overtime loss point and all that stuff. It kind of tends to gum up the standings, and a bunch of teams end up, like, for example, as we said here, the Flyers are 26th in league standings. They are actually slightly below 500. They're .482 as far as their points percentage right now. But the team below them, the Anaheim Ducks, are 500. They're 24-24-6. So as far as hockey's concerned, they're a 500 team, and that's what we're talking about. And they're pretty close to picking top 5 in the draft.
It's really funny how that they finally win a game on Saturday that pretty much they only win because it was a super shorthanded Pittsburgh lineup. I mean, if Crosby and Malkin play in that game, it's probably a bloodbath. But they finally win a game. They get 2 points. They actually have 3 points in their last 3 games. And on the same night that they finally get a win and get 2 points, Anaheim won in a shootout against LA, who has a ridiculous home record. Yep, I think they've only lost like 3 games on home ice all year.
Yep, that ruined the 6-leg parlay for me.
And
Kings
Seattle got a win. And again, team that like wasn't winning games earlier in the week when the Flyers were also losing, but they get a win to keep pace. Yep. Pretty much the only team that kind of really ruined things from that perspective yesterday was Buffalo. Buffalo played Nashville, so depending on how you want to look at it, I suppose. But there's a pretty clear cut, like San Jose and Chicago are what they are, and I'm really at the bottom. I think you like there's an element where I feel like you can couple Nashville in with that too. It's a pretty sizable gap to where the Flyers are. But even Buffalo's got a shot. I mean, Buffalo's got 3 extra games to play on the Flyers.
Well, and
the margin is 6. So do the math, and then there's still head to heads with this. I think Flyers and Sabres play twice head to head. So there's head to head that goes into it. There's just the Flyers also have a really tough schedule coming back from all of this.
Well, and as we'll get into a little bit later in the show, the Flyers have already kind of started adjusting the roster a little bit, and maybe not necessarily in the most positive direction as far as this year's team goes. We'll break that down a little bit further, but the team didn't necessarily get much better today. especially when those players are unavailable for a week plus.
Sure.
But regardless, you've been struggling down the stretch a little bit. You had 3 games in a row in the middle here where you were shut out, so goal scoring has been a problem. Um, your goaltending has been okay. Your defense has struggled at times. Your goal scoring has really struggled at times. It's one of those things that if you're a fan of the notion of this team drafting in the top 5, if you're a fan of this team drafting a Michael Mesa or Roger McQueen or one of these guys who are going to get drafted 4 through 7, then this has been a great week for you. And that trade was probably a good direction for you. As we sit here recording on Sunday morning, there's some rumors of some other trades floating around that may or may not happen. But if they do, it certainly doesn't sound like they're going to make the roster better right now.
Right. Well, you said that the
quite
thing about
frankly, just buckle in, and we're kind of here for the last 30 games or so.
It's actually 25 already, believe it
Okay,
or not.
wow. Oh, thank God.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
what?
know. But well, to your point about the streaky thing, they started January with 4 straight losses, and then came the emotional high. You play Anaheim, the Cutter game, and it's like, okay, that started something.
And you ride that high for almost 2 weeks.
Well, and we talked a little bit because I think when was our last show? Our last show was the right after the first Jersey game of the 3, right? So that was the first one that I went to, and they come in out of that. They end up getting a win against Detroit, who's played better lately. So that's not a
the win is aging
right. Well, it's not a light win by any stretch. Like it's not like you just beat up on Anaheim. That works for you. And going into the game against the Rangers that they had, it was like, okay, you've won 5 of 6, you've gotten points in 6 straight. Maybe you're turning a corner here, and
it was a big game at the time because the Rangers were turning some things around, and if you beat them and take 2 points there at the time on that day, that mattered in the standings.
Oh, sure, and
like those 2 points were big.
Well, and what was funny is that so I did a spot on the station before the Ranger game, and then a week later before they played the Islanders for the 3rd time in the month, as the month basically came to an end. And that's how quick it was for me to probably shift from, well, I guess see what you got when you play the Rangers and Islanders back to back, and then you play the Devils again 2 more times, and you play the Islanders again. You're on a little bit of a run. See what happens. And in that time, they got, that Ranger game was a tough one because as bad as the final score looked, the Rangers just dominated with deflections and screens and took away everything there. And let's face it, you got hit with the 1 week that it feels like Igor Shesterkin played out of his mind, and then came right back down to earth to what he's been for the rest of the year after that. It was what it was. They looked a little, playing the Islanders on the back end of the back-to-back there. They looked a little lifeless there. It was kind of a rough one. The score wasn't bad, but it just didn't have that juice.
No, Smirnov looked pretty solid in that game, for what it's worth.
Solid, but I didn't love the 3rd goal. And that's going to be a recurring theme as we get through the course of the week, because at this point, I'll get to it from the one. I'll get to it from the one from this week. But
that's fair. But if you look at your backup and say, well, I didn't love the 3rd goal, I don't know, man. You need your team to score more than 1. But
in that case, yes, I'm saying it, as it carries through,
But then you bounce back really strong against the Devils on Monday night,
right? And that felt like another good emotion game. Yeah, like there was some build up to that. They got out ahead of it early.
It felt like a nice response after the Rangers and Islanders games.
Yeah, the back to back that you didn't get anything.
Hey. Yep.
Yeah, sure. And it made you think for a second maybe that was just a 2-game hiccup, and then you go right back to what you were doing, and then came the shutout streak. Then you don't score against the Devils at all. And to be fair, whether you want to pick the 3rd one or the 4th one of the second period against the Devils, when you go down after a certain point, you just aren't going to play like that for the rest of the game. You're on cruise control at that point. Like, get this over with, burn day. And they had a game the next night too. So you might
especially first half of a back-to-back, you're absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Now the second one of that, you take a whole bunch of stuff out of play because it is the back-to-back situation. I'm sure that there was at least a little hint of something that could have been going on during the course of the day that led to that, because it was right up, as we've come to find out with that trade, it sounds like it was agreed upon right around the time the opening face-off of that game happened. They then take Frost out of the game, banged up a little, knowing he's involved in the trade. You're already down Owen Tippett from the night before, so that's let's do this deduction. You're down your third from the moment the game starts. You're down your third leading scorer. They score a goal. The Islanders do, I should say, score a goal to take the lead, and it's at that moment you decide that your second leading scorer is not seeing the ice for the rest of the night. And then you have to basically have to pull your fourth leading scorer at the time off the ice because he's going to be involved in a trade that's coming down later. So, okay, now what's left in that back-to-back situation? Where are you getting a goal from in that one, pretty much?
Against the Islanders.
Yeah.
Like, come on, it's not. And you got another decent performance out of Fedotov. Again, nothing
was all right.
spectacular, but he was solid. He would listen. If Ivan Fedotov settles into just being a solid NHL backup, I'm supremely happy. And from what I've seen out of him recently, I see that capability.
Maybe from those two games, the Washington game,
Small
I disagree with you.
Yes, fair enough. So as you alluded to, if we're just kind of time-wise breaking things down, let's talk about that trade after the Islanders game, because obviously we've heard since then that it kind of started in the morning and then it kind of got agreed to right around puck drop. Also, just a shout out to you, Kevin. I'm sure you've probably listened to most of it, but listeners too, go out and listen to Danny Briere press availabilities. He did Jeff Merrick's podcast On the Sheet. He's done a bunch of different podcasty kind of long form-ish interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And him talking about how that day unfolded is really fascinating. But as it kind of breaks throughout the evening, we learn that there's a trade. We learn that Flyers are getting Kuzmenko. Some more details end up creeping out. Right. So eventually the whole trade comes out.
So here's kind of the pecking order for how this went down, because for realistically about two periods of the game that we were watching, there wasn't a hint of anything. Really, like it kind of popped up right as the second period was ending. By that point, Frost was already out of the game, but it wasn't known. And he had tried to come back already at one point. So it was a little bit right. So it just seemed like it was an injury thing. It didn't seem like we weren't sure. People were trying to figure out whether or not it was one or the other, but we weren't sure. You're already on the backstory of Michkov got benched, so that was probably that was really kind of taking precedence. And then it started to And then it started to circulate about, well, there might be something close between Philly and Calgary. Kuzmenko's not playing. And that was about as far as we knew. And kind of that was the talk of the second intermission, was just, I don't know what they would want Kuzmenko for specifically here, other than the Russian factor. I'm not really, there was a lot of not really sure what the fit's going to be kind of material, because for a John Tortorella coached team, he's not the type of player that you would get to say be part of the group going forward for the long haul. He's not a defensive minded guy. And so if that's the centerpiece of the deal, how exactly does this make sense to a degree from their perspective? Until you get it, and sure, as we get into the cap situation of it, that's obviously where it makes a lot of sense. But then it starts to kind of filter through, then we know Frost isn't coming back. They do kind of, I don't think anything was released that ever said it was not injury related or injury related. I think it was just he's not going to return. Torts did say post game that it was due to he was banged up, and that was before everything was officially confirmed. So it wasn't, that one wasn't as rock solid. What I think we actually knew is that if anything was going down between the two teams, Kuzmenko was already held out of the lineup. And then after the first period of the game that Calgary was playing, that's when Pelletier came out. pulled from the game.
Well,
So it was very maybe within 10 minutes of him being pulled from the game that people were saying, yes, he's in it too.
well, and as it's come out in some of those Danny Briere availabilities, he's talked about the fact that Morgan Frost left the game because he was kind of banged up. I think one of the reasons he didn't come back in is because he was involved in this trade.
Sure.
But that made everybody a little bit spooked, a little bit gun shy, and that was what Morgan Frost getting a little dinged up was what prompted them to ask Calgary to remove Pelletier from the lineup. So it's just interesting to hear how that all unfolded.
Yeah, kind of a joint agreement there and things like that, and it was
good business, just good business.
Well, let's be clear. As soon as there was a rumor out that something might go down, you didn't see anybody of importance in the management box for the rest of the night. Like, it doesn't mean they're not in the room, by the way. There's a gap between where you can see them and where you can't. They were hard at work at that point. And that was it. And so you could tell there was activity going on, that there was something was going on. So I'm sure at that point, that's when Danny gets on the phone and sits there and says, get the other guy out. We'll keep him out. I mean, that being said, Farabee played right through the end.
He did. Yeah.
I mean, down to...
Well, Danny talked about the fact that he's out there blocking shots. He's out there, and
he was out there for the final shift of the game.
And Danny said he's up in the box cringing every time he's blocking a shot, going, ooh.
Well, because you can't ask a John Tortorella team to not do that. You know what I mean?
Right, of course.
Is he going to block shots? Yes.
Right. So eventually it kind of all trickles out, and the final trade ends up being Calgary receives Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee. The Philadelphia Flyers receive Andrei Kuzmenko, Jakob Pelletier, a second-round pick from this year. That's Calgary's pick, right?
I believe so.
I believe it's Calgary's pick this year, and then a 7th-round pick in 2028.
I will double check that. I will double check that for you just to confirm, but I believe it is.
Right. So you alluded to a little bit earlier, but the break it all down here a little bit. I'll do it here. Jakob Pelletier, or I'm sorry, Andrei Kuzmenko is making $5 million or $5.5 million.
5.5, yeah.
Yep. But he is up at the end of the season.
Right.
Joel Farabee is making $5 million and has 2 more years after this left.
I thought it was 3.
I think he's in year 3 of 6. Oh no, it is 3 after this. I'm sorry. 3 more years at $5 million per. So those are that's why those pieces were exchanged.
So I was going to say the key phrase that you didn't say when you just broke that all down was no salary retention.
Correct.
The fact that you didn't have to do that and you got 3 years off the books for a guy making $5 million, like you just brought up within the last little bit about we're going to keep an eye on things over there as there always are. There's rumors around the same guys you always hear, right?
Absolutely. We've heard rumors about, let's be honest. We've heard rumors about Scott Lawton for 3 years.
You want to go more specific?
You want to go more longer than that.
I was going to say, you want to go more specific? We've heard Scott Lawton in Toronto in the same sentence for 5 years.
Yep.
Like, forever. Stop.
They love.
But that being said,
Shanahan has to love him, and it makes sense.
But that being said, like, if you decide to, if they get to the point where they move on, and even Lawton's contract doesn't really warrant this, it's still only $3 million as a cap hit.
Right.
But Rasmus Ristolainen's the other name that's going to be out there a lot, right?
Hmm.
Now that's another contract that's north of $5 million that has some term left on it. Right.
One more year after this? 2.
I think it's 2. I'm double checking that for you too. It's 2 after this year. So that's why it's kind of significant. If they move off of, let's just assume that, well, I don't want to say let's assume they don't keep Kuzmenko. It's that if they do, it's not anywhere close to the contract that it is now because it hasn't. Let's face it. He
goes absolutely bananas these last 25 games, and even then,
I mean, the guy takes a shift and he gets an assist right away, though. So, like,
I know,
stranger things.
And who's he been joined at the hip with since he got here?
Well, not on that shift, but by the end of the game,
I'm not talking about on the ice.
Oh well, sure, but by the end of it, they were on the ice together too.
I know. And I
That's
don't
what I'm
think
saying.
that's
By
an
the end of the
accident.
game, it was no, certainly not. I'd be more curious what I'd be more curious about is to see where they decide to ultimately, once they get him available anyway, where they slip Pelletier in there. I would almost reverse it. I think I would just, assuming they need Rodrigo Abels to go back to center for the time being, because they're short centers all over the place at this point.
Pelletier's not a center, right?
No, he's a winger, but I would imagine
Okay.
that you would move Abels back to center. Probably put Kuzmenko, if you put Kuzmenko on that wing with Michkov and use that as a line, because Abels and Michkov because Abels can speak 4 languages and Russian's one of them.
That whole line can communicate, and I think that
Right.
would be really good for Michkov.
So maybe you give Pelletier a shot with Lawton Konechny.
Okay, I love that, especially
because you're not because you're not touching the Cates line. They're not going to do that.
Nope. Why would you? That's been your best line.
Although that's where some of that shifting went to, because later on it was Cates was centering Konechny and I guess Kuzmenko, and they switched it around. They had Lawton up with Forrester Brink for a little bit.
And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it did take some time for Kuzmenko and Pelletier to get into the country. Kuzmenko ended up getting his paperwork in time to play against the Pittsburgh Penguins on Saturday night. The Pelletier paperwork, as far as we heard as of yesterday, was still being sorted out. It's not expected to be a long-term problem. It's just a paperwork thing. He should be good to go after 4 Nations.
Right, because someone was talking about, like, there's this general conversation, but like kind of why does it have to, not why does it have to be this way, but like what really could be like the holdup in something like this. And to my understanding, part of it has to do with, it's one thing for them to play for a team in Canada, and then you've got to process paperwork for, now you're playing for a team that's in the US, and that goes into game checks, that goes into, everything with the cap and the salary and all stuff like that. Like, Kuzmenko probably plays Thursday if they can make it in time. Is what I'm guessing. The issue there was
delayed in Toronto due to
right. The issue there was some weather issues, and there was icing going on, and they couldn't get out of Toronto. They showed up after the first period. That was when they got there on Thursday. So they were there. They watched the second period of the game that the Flyers played against Washington. They watched the rest of it, and then the next day they got to practice to really get familiar with everybody. But they watched and they were there, and I'm pretty sure, Pelletier was talking with Danny Briere for pretty much the entire period. Kuzmenko was with Jonesy the entire period. It was like, I'm pretty sure they didn't stop until the period was over, and then they finally got to go downstairs, I guess. But
absolutely, and both guys seem like great guys. And just real quick on a personal note about Frost and Farabee out of town.
mm-hmm.
If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that I love me some Joel Farabee. I have since his rookie year. He has been one of my favorite players. I have been following his career very closely. He is a player that I'm invested in, and it is a disappointment. It's one of those situations where it's unfortunate that he wasn't part of the solution. I'm not upset that they traded him, because I think it was good for the long-term franchise, right? Like, if I'm talking about the logo, I think it was a good deal, right? I think it was, quite frankly, I think it was a move that Flyers fans were hungry for, because you've proven that you're willing to trade guys like that, right? Guys in their mid-20s who have undershot their expectations a little bit, still have a lot of talent, need a little bit of a change of scenery. Regimes in the past for this team would double down and commit to those players and lock them in forever. And I'm grateful that Danny Briere has shown the willingness to move off of them if they're not part of the long-term success solution.
Where I give Danny Briere credit for doing this is strictly a timing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you did not have to do this until maybe right up until the deadline, if that's what you really wanted to do. And I think it says a lot to, because they can say everything that they want to say after the fact, right? That it doesn't necessarily take them out of play for making a run. Torts is going to sit there and say, I want to see if we can make a run. I get it, and I get what the standings were telling you, even right up against that game, right? You're not as good of a team now as you were a week ago.
I
And
agree.
and you're not as good of a team for a couple reasons. First of all, you just basically played an entire week with no reinforcements coming whatsoever from that. I mean, the lineup that they almost look, credit to the team for an effort thing. You almost beat the Washington Capitals with half of a minor league lineup.
It was the Phantoms played that night.
Right.
And yeah, but I did just want to just I wish Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee the best. They were excellent guys as far as the room goes, as far as they were both in that group that I've been talking about forever, the guys who stayed over the summer, the guys who I did kind of think were part of the longer term solution. So it is a bit of a bummer for me, like I said, that they're not. But it it that trade has forced a shift in my perspective as far as that core and what the future of this team is actually going to look like.
So and that's why for me, like I give Briere credit for doing it when he did it, because you're making a cognitive decision on, I know what the standings say, but we're not going to be part of that. There's too many teams in front of us to make that up. Even if the points total isn't that big, everybody's in the same situation, and some of them are going to wait longer to make that decision. Some of them are going to think they're closer. They've done other things like this already. If you're, I'm going to go look at the standings and pick one of them that's probably a little closer, but like, say, I don't know, say you're the Islanders. You've been in the playoffs fairly recently. Are you selling that quickly? And look, and I know there's other reports out about what they're going to potentially do that are already being brought into question, but you get my point.
There's some wild stuff going on there.
Or what if you're Pittsburgh, and even if you've missed the playoffs like you did last year, are you going to do the thing that nobody expects you to do, that you probably don't want to do? Are you going to break up the core? Those are decisions.
There's some huge questions. Yeah.
But those are decisions that teams like that hold on to until the very last minute. And the Flyers could have done the same thing. They could have held on to, maybe, if Frost and Farabee go on a hot streak, they make us better. They get us closer to the playoffs, and we're going to try to go for the play. And no, they pulled back on that.
Well, and in fact, they got Joel Farabee. They struck while the iron was hot with him, right? He got scratched. Since he got scratched, he looked a lot
Had
better.
A little hot streak.
Was on a solid little run where he looked like he was making his money again. And they said, "All right, great, get him out of here," before he could slump back down.
Well, and that's why for me,
but
that's why for me, like I give Briere credit for that part of it. There's
he
more.
Got up there. He got up there and said, "Trades are hard."
Well, I'll go back to that in a second.
You will.
Well, because here's the thing. So I'll give Briere even more credit if some of the rumors that are out there, if you find a way to keep going with this thing, and it's not tearing the whole thing down, but it's coming pretty close. I mean, if specifically,
you're taking out 10 pole pieces.
Well, specifically, because there's an element to me where I know the Lawton rumors are pretty hot right now. There's an element to me where I'm not sure if they go there, just because the room's already shaken.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think.
And if
if you trade Scott Lawton,
they just lean into that,
you're putting a lot of faith in. Okay, and again, this is my outside perspective, not being in the locker room literally at all. At that point, I think you're putting a lot of your locker room culture on your captain, Sean Couturier, who's a little bit older than a lot of this team and a little bit quieter than a lot of this team. Travis Konechny is probably your vocal leader.
I think there's a little bit.
York, Sanheim, like you go to your defense.
Sanheim was going to be the next guy I was going to say. And Sanheim would be probably, like, I don't think Sanheim's necessarily, like, I'm sure it comes across this way maybe from the outside, like you're talking about. I don't think he's as quiet a guy as you think he might be. Okay. He's probably, like, in fairness, if you moved Lawton and there's a letter available, he's probably the guy who gets the letter.
I agree. Although, quite frankly, underratedly, I think Cam York is a pretty good leader. I
mean, short of giving it to somebody else who you would categorize in the same territory as a Lawton type, like, there's a world where I see Garnet Hathaway in that territory, because people are going to look to him like that, right?
I agree. And I think
And
this year he has been a leader. When he plays
that's
physically, the team follows that lead.
and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this either, where we're like essentially trying to like almost speaking it into existence that there's a guy who's
Right.
not there anymore. I just
No, because
I
I
just
love Scott Long, obviously.
I just wonder if they're like I wonder if they would do that for for what they
Culture
just did.
purposes.
It's not even about the culture. I think it's just for the structure of the room. Like
Okay.
I feel like that's a decision that almost sounds like it comes more off season because it's like, listen, off
You can
season
come in
stuff
with a
happens. You
fresh.
come in, everybody comes in on the same page. It's not going through the whole thing. And
And leaders emerge, whereas now you've already taken a couple of guys who were on the leadery end of things, and
there's
taking
also
Scott Lawton out would be a damaging move too. Yeah.
but there's also the element of how quickly do you want to move this thing along? And if you want to move it along and this is the time to strike on a deal, you just
Right.
might have to make the trade. If
Right.
I'm more focused on the Ristolainen aspect of this because if that's the deal they move,
That's
then
long
you
term
get
money. Big money.
well because at this point now that you've moved the Farabee contract, I'm struggling to find real like for how many years did we sit there and go all the bad contracts, right? Do you know how many bad contracts I think the Flyers have if you move Ristolainen too?
Well, and considering the fact that Ristolainen has played his way into his contract, I would argue that they don't have any.
Well, no, there's a simple answer. It's two. They have two bad contracts after this.
If you count Fedotov, that's not a great contract, but
No, that's not.
it's short. I don't. You know.
No, because there's a contract that you can't do anything about. That's one of them. Now, do you know where I'm going?
Is that Ryan Ellis?
Well, sure,
Which
and
doesn't
listen.
even really count because you can
Well,
LTIR that whenever you want once you get up to it.
you can, but they won't because they don't want to do anything with the cap penalty stuff. You know what I think you're headed towards? I don't know if it happens this year or next. It could be either or, but you're probably headed towards buying out either the last year of it or maybe the last two. It's down to two after this year. You can either buy out the last year and it adds a penalty to a cap that's going to be up way more than you should worry about.
Or can you fire it? Can you fire it to a team looking to reach the floor?
At that time, maybe.
Right? Like if, for example, I'm trying to think of a smaller market team that's not going to be very good next year. It would have been in Arizona, right? But obviously, I think Utah has changed.
Utah's got reason to do some more stuff.
Right. I don't know.
I mean, San Jose.
Right. I'm just going to throw somebody out there. Let's throw San Jose out there. If they're looking to reach the floor next year, here's Ryan Ellis's contract. Have fun. Because I think within the next couple of years, you're going to see teams that aren't necessarily the most competitive operating on an internal budget. And that cap floor is going to be interesting. Because in 3 years, we've talked about this on the show for a long time that the salary cap's going to be going up. They have announced a bit of a structure over the next couple of years. I think they did that since our last show. But essentially, with 3 years from now, the cap is going to be about $115 million, and the cap floor is going to be about where the ceiling is now. So teams are going to have to get money in the door, and I mean, somebody is going to want a Ryan Ellis contract. If you need
possibly, we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's one of them, and it might, like I said, that might even just be a buyout candidate once you think you're free of some of the other stuff, right? Like you've got 1 year left on a lot of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just this year alone, take the 5.5 that you could get if you don't keep Kuzmenko. It's supposed to be a $7.5 million raise on the cap to begin with. Eric Johnson's another mil. Cal Peterson's contract coming off the books is another 3.85 mil. The Tony DeAngelo buyout ends. That's another 1.67 mil. Then add in if you move both Risto and Lawton, and it's another $8.1 million on top of that. They're looking at like $27 million of cap space just created from that.
And a lot of people immediately after this deal, because it didn't make the roster better right now.
Right.
A lot of people went, okay, and myself included, means this is one of two things.
Mm-hmm.
Either they're shifting some things around to make a big Elias Pettersson move, because hey, listen, I'm not necessarily saying it's likely at this point,
This
but
was
if
also 24 hours prior to JT Miller going to
JT
New York
Miller,
again.
right? Although I do still think Elias Pettersson is he might be gone. Um, but regardless, right? So we're looking at one of two things. We're looking at either, oh my God, they're clearing space to get Elias Pettersson. Holy
Right.
smokes. Or, and Danny Briere ended up mentioning this in his availability within the next several days here, that this is for future cap space. And obviously you look at the Kuzmenko Farabee numbers and, Farabee clears all that space moving forward by getting rid of him.
Right. He had the one availability the day or 2 days after the trade happened where he did mention the cap flexibility. But then went on TV on NBC Sports Philly before the Colorado game on the day after the media availability that he had with all the regulars of the beats and all that stuff, and actually maybe mentioned a little bit more specifically what the cap flexibility was for, which was the future center.
Exactly. And Elias Pettersson's a future center. I'm just saying.
He is, but I think what people really took from that was, okay, if you're looking for cap flexibility and you're not necessarily because one of the things that I think has been consistent is that it doesn't mean they're looking to move assets that they've gotten either to go get a Pettersson in a trade. You know what I mean? So then you start talking, are you going to offer sheet somebody? Is there a free agent that you can just go into the UFA market for potentially? Is that where it comes from? And I think the offer sheet thing is probably the more realistic possibility because I don't think you want a guy who's 28. I think you want a guy who's 23, 24, maybe,
18.
Well, 18's the draft though. That's a different story. Which no, but think about that. You don't move any assets. You could offer sheet somebody, and you could also play with the idea that you could use your own first on a top 5 pick.
Absolutely. And if let's say you end up somewhere in that 4 to 7 range. Those players I was talking about earlier, the Roger McQueens, the Michael Misas, those centers that are there.
Everybody other than Hakens, yeah.
Right.
Unless you win the lottery.
Unless you spike the lottery, which is obviously an idea. So you add him. You add whoever that is, whatever center you pick in the top 7.
Sure. Misa seems like a pretty consensus. Like if you're picking 4th, go for it.
And may walk onto your roster next year. Jet Luchenko is probably going to walk onto your roster.
I'd still say penciled in, but you're not wrong. Like definitely into camp. He's all eyes on him in camp. Absolutely.
I think Denver Barkey's going to take a deep run into camp. I think he's probably going to end up with the Phantoms, but I think he's going to make you look at it.
Sure. And I think he's with the Phantoms. You're right.
All of a sudden, if your draft pick can make a deep run in training camp and even threaten the Jet Luchenko stint, all of a sudden your center depth looks way different.
Well, here's what I would say. If you consider the possibility of offer sheeting somebody, signing somebody, however you want to look at it, you get the other
thing. You can even add another.
Well, you get a guy. Let's just play it that way. You get a guy. Yep. You've got Luchenko. They're also one of the things that was brought up, and I think Briere just said it himself flat out. I don't remember if this was on. It was on one of these things, right? Brought up the fact that Morgan Frost was going to have to get paid a little more. That the next contract he's going to get paid. And I'm going to tell you right now, Frost's cap hit was $2.1 million. That's what they moved, right? It's not that substantial. If they're going to give a center that was currently on the roster as of a week ago, let's just say, if they were giving one of those centermen a $4.5 million cap hit for whatever comes next, it's going to be Noah Cates over Morgan Frost. And that's exactly what they did. And so be prepared for that. Like part of the cap space that they're taking is they don't want to let Noah Cates go because they like the progress there. And he flat out mentioned guys passing these other two. And he brought up Cates, Forrester, Brink, all of them. Like they've all taken steps bigger than Frost and Farabee did. And if you're going to, and that to me says, if I'm going to give out hypothetically speaking, if I'm giving Noah Cates a 4x4.5 to be future third line center because I want to go get somebody who plays better at the top, and I like Luchenko, and I might draft somebody better than both of them. Who knows? Then that's how I'm going to spend that money. And guess what? For the next handful of years, I don't think you care if Sean Couturier is your 4th line center. That's what it's
Well,
shaping up to
and
be.
yeah. Well, and you mentioned something interesting there, and that is, here's the thing. There's a couple different ways to acquire a player in the NHL. You can trade for a
Of
guy,
course.
you can sign a guy in free agency, you can draft a guy. Probably the most contentious way to acquire a player in the NHL is to offer sheet somebody.
Right, which still qualifies as signing a guy, as you brought up,
But you know what I mean. It's
but you force a
signing
team's
somebody
hand.
with a threat. Right.
Right, you
Um,
force a team's hand if you're going to get that guy. Absolutely.
Here's how we sit today. Flyers have 3 first round picks this year.
Yep.
There's rumors that we're and I'm sorry, and also 4 second round picks. So we're talking 7 picks in the first 2 rounds this year.
Sure.
There's
What do
rumors
you
that you're
now?
trading. Well, there's rumors that you're trading Ristolainen, and there's rumors that you're trading Lawton. There's rumors that both of them will fetch you a first round pick. Let's just speculate and say that happens. And that's the only compensation I'm talking about right now. Obviously, I think the deals would look a little different. But let's just say those 2 players out, first round picks come in. Let's say they're next year's picks.
Sure.
Why? You don't need 5 first round picks this year if you're offer sheeting somebody and getting rid of your first round pick next year. Because the thing about offer sheets is that you have to use your own draft picks.
Right.
So
And
if
usually this type of stuff, like the signing portion of this, happens post draft, so you don't focus. It's not on this year's picks.
Hey, by the way, you know who doesn't have a first round pick this year, but has a first round pick next year and is interested in Scott Lawton?
As Toronto does.
That would be the Toronto Maple Leafs. Okay.
No,
Anyway,
the reason why I paused, by the way, is because Winnipeg's been another team mentioned in the same sentence, by the way, and
it's
I think
fair.
they do have a first this year.
I know. But
Just throwing it
regardless,
out there. But
yeah,
still okay. Percentage wise, what's the percentage that they make 7 picks in the first 2 rounds this year?
almost zero, frankly, because
Exactly.
I think the likelihood that they either combine some picks and trade up or do some shuffling back into next year to future proof themselves a little bit if they are planning on offer sheeting. I don't think they make 7 selections in the first 2 rounds this
Yeah.
year.
Right. Well, exactly. It's not happening. They're not making. To me, they're not making in a draft that everybody's already worried about whether or not after 15 it's even that deep.
Right. Right. It's a little bit of a thinner
And
draft. Next year is rumored to be much deeper.
now, well, and look, I hate conversations like that because to me, also, there's always look. 2017 wasn't that good either, but there's players that were found in it because
Of
you
course.
take the right guy and develop in the right way. Like, I don't think that if they with 4 second round picks, I don't think that that should mean, oh well, you're just going to strike out 4 times because it's not that deep of a draft. It shouldn't be
Of
that way.
course.
You should be able to make 2 to 3 picks in the second round and feel like you can get one guy, at least one, who turns into something.
Right, who ends
Doesn't
up
mean
in
he's a
your
star.
middle six? Right. Does he
Right.
end up
Doesn't
in
mean
your
he has to
middle
be a star.
six? Is he your
It's
fifth
possible.
defenseman? Is he your backup goalie? Like you can find some
Something.
quality options, right?
Right.
Um, or like I said, you can trade one. Oh, this team's got somebody they really like. Okay, cool. Give me your second round pick next year. Okay, great. So now when I sign that offer sheet that includes first and a second as compensation, I have backup.
Right.
I think there might be a little bit of that going on Danny Briere, even if he doesn't end up being able to successfully offer sheet anybody. I'd be surprised if he wasn't at least thinking about it.
Well, I mean, the funny thing about this time of year, or just in general too, is Danny Briere always has this look about him every time we see him around this time of
That
year. That's
that man is
like
up to something.
that exactly because he's just usually so happy go lucky about everything. Like he's just the nicest guy in general. And it's like deep down, you know that there's also stuff that's being worked on that he's trying to navigate a deal or whatever. So who knows? I mean, and this whole thing is weird, by the way. Like this whole situation now that they go on break for 2 weeks, but there's no roster freeze, so you can do whatever you want to.
Yep.
There's no telling what could happen by the time this break is over.
Listen, I said last summer when Matvey Mishkov came over, we ended up having to take a bit of a break. Our first show back from that break, I said that now that Matvey Mishkov is on the Philadelphia Flyers roster, it's time to go. It's time to hit the gas pedal. It's time to start. Danny had his little training wheels year where he kind of got himself figured out. He got himself comfortable. Now
Right.
it's time to GM and now it's time to go. And we've seen his first real moves. right? The Frost and Farabee trade.
Well, and I think that there was, because one of the things I brought up, or that I remember mentioning to a degree, is that there's his very first trade was the one with LA, the Provorov deal with all that stuff, and it was very creative to get a third team involved and to do all of this other bits and pieces thing.
Get the first round pick, and right.
This is probably, it's not exactly the same thing, but there's an element to this that you sit there and you go, okay, there's something deeper to, like, you're thinking ahead here. And it has and sure, with the cap flexibility, with the idea that you could trade 2 more players, that you brought some, like, even down to, like, there was an element of it where I go, okay, so there's a second round pick involved, which there were picks involved in that LA deal. Mm-hmm. There's a 23-year-old who comes back. That doesn't feel that far removed from, hey, by the way, at that time you got a 21-year-old defenseman. Right. That was I guess we'll see, who, by the way, did debut this year in the NHL. So, like, he's amounted to a little something. I don't know if he's a long-term piece, but he's amounted to something.
And by that, of course, you're referring to Helge Grans.
Yeah, correct. Yep. And I get, you took back a contract that you're going to wait and see on, that can come off the books very soon. Not quite as soon as Peterson, but you get the point. Yep. And, I don't think there was near, like, the one thing they didn't get from the LA trade and the Provorov deal was immediate cap flexibility. It was going to be more long-term. What they did with it after that, different story. I got to eat the money on Cal Peterson, but I know it's going to come off the books eventually. I'm going to see what happens with the prospect, for one, who does eventually make it. Got picks all over the place. One of those picks hasn't even been used yet, because Columbus was part of this whole thing, and you still have their second round pick that they sent you from that trade that's finally going to get used this year.
The bummer, this is their best year, and that pick's going to end up in the 40s, but...
Yeah, but see, I keep coming back. But if you couple that with the other deals that they've made, like, it is pretty funny that it also is pretty funny that the immediate week after the deal was made, they all went on, like, losing streaks. Mm-hmm. You get Calgary second, and they've lost 4 or 5 since the trade. You get you have the Columbus pick. Columbus is in a playoff spot one day. The next, they fall back to, like, 17th in the league standings. You're holding Anaheim's pick because of a trade you made well after getting that pick. That's probably going to be top 10 of the round.
That'll be good. That'll be a solid
so it's like I keep coming back to the possibility that you have all 7 of these picks in the top 50. It's very distinctly possible if the right things happen.
Yeah, and honestly, if you have 7 picks in the top 50, I don't know how many of those.
Guess what?
Get shuffled forward to next year, for example.
Well, and guess what? Not that the number goes much higher than this anyway, but you'd take 7 of the top 60 if you have that kind of abundance. Like,
well, they're almost guaranteed to have 7 of the top 60.
But that's what I know. That's why I said it doesn't go much higher than that anyway. Right. But you get the point. It's like you would take that, just having it in general, let alone, hey, maybe all of these teams don't make the playoffs and you just ended up with all that stuff. But my point is that the creativity of that first trade was you also had to take on a piece that you were completely in wait and see mode. It's going to have to see if it pans out. And then you actually flipped it into a first round pick. You already got a first in that deal initially, and you flipped another piece into another first. Both of which, right? No, one of them was Oliver Bonk, but the other one is to be determined.
It's gotten traded a couple of times, yeah. I understand people being upset, annoyed, frustrated with some of the moves Danny Briere has made because you liked Morgan Frost, because you liked Joel Farabee. I get all of that. But as I sit here right now, from an asset management, like, team standpoint, I think Danny Briere has done a fantastic job with the job he inherited.
This is the other thing I want to give Briere credit for too, though, because it couldn't have been more than 2 weeks prior. It was actually less than, I think it was 10 days, that he finally had his mid-season availability, and I called it flat out, basically a giant word salad of, well, you got to work with both sides, and we got to make sure it's right for the team, and I'm trying to get better. And it sounded very much like trades are hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then sure enough, 10 days later, he actually makes a deal and jumps into this thing and makes a
makes
deal that
real deal.
it makes a real deal for the future.
Right. Yeah, but
That seems like
we didn't
it's
trade a
making a
second round
decision.
pick for right. It was a real roster altering. Like, okay, I mentioned a lot of a GM's first year and a half is kind of undoing what the previous regime did to the best of your ability.
Right.
To me, in a lot of ways, this was Danny Briere's first step forward. This is him putting his mark on the history of the Philadelphia Flyers
Well,
in the first real way.
Because they don't have a choice. There's also an aspect of it to me that's also that a lot of this is, and maybe not necessarily like I can't go back 2 years. Like people are going to do that with Lawton and Ristolainen. That,
Of course.
oh, maybe 2 years ago you had an offer that was better than what you're going to get in today's league, right? Like you know which conversation I'm talking about too.
Mm-hmm.
That it comes back to the, oh, did they have a first and a second on the table for Lawton at one point in time and turn it down because he's just a good guy in the room or something? Like
Insane.
we don't know how real that was anyway, but you get the point. And maybe now you don't get something like that. Maybe now the best you do is pull another second, right?
Right.
But there's an element of better late than never to doing the things in a rebuild that you're kind of supposed to do. And I say that with more eyes on if they do something with Lawton and Ristolainen, because the fact that I can't go back 2 years ago and say better late than never that you didn't move Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost, who were 23 and 24 at the time, or 22 and 23 or whatever it was. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to advance the 2 years and go, well, now that they're 24 and 25 and we got to start thinking about next contracts again. And the point production is just not adding up to the money that's going to go into this thing and what they need to do. Among other reasons, right? Like of course there's going to be talk about whether or not they fit a John Tortorella coach team and all that stuff like that. But I do think there's validity in what Briere talks about with, well, Frost was going to have to get paid, and basically in again in nicer terms. But what do you translate that to? Frost was going to have to get paid, and I wasn't willing to pay him that.
Well, and why would you be willing to pay him that when John Tortorella is not going to play him like that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, let's be real. Like the coach doesn't like the player for whatever reason. For whatever reason. But
well, just because, right? Because that's
totally.
how it goes. They make up.
They just don't. We've seen this, right?
And a guy's mind gets made up early, and to Frost and Farabee's credit, even if they weren't the favorites of the coach, they tried to work through it. They tried to be professional about it and see what they, what can I do to be better? What can I do to help the situation? And if it doesn't work that way, it doesn't work that way.
Hearing them come out and say that they feel wanted and appreciated in Calgary did hurt my heart a little bit, though.
Yeah, but there's always it's two sides again, though. There's always the possibility that the other, I mean, let's this way, Kuzmenko looks happy as hell to be out of the situation he was in too.
Yeah, and okay. We haven't really talked about the actual pieces coming back. We've talked about what it means for the roster. We've talked about the guys who left. Kuzmenko and Pelletier.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about Kuzmenko because the money thing comes into play. Like it's a contract that you don't have to look much further than you don't look beyond this year on.
Well, and it's really funny because when this trade went down, my wife asked me, she's like, how is he making $5.5 million? Because I told her kind of the recent stats, and I just showed her the elite prospects page of what he did that first year in Vancouver, and she went, "Oh,
yeah,
right."
Sure.
He was at 39 goals.
Exactly.
And
you have a 39 goal season.
And he's willing to take only 5.5. Okay, great. This sounds awesome. And then it turns out that I don't know what the issue is. Maybe there are some motivation problems. Maybe there's a bit of the league got a book on him. Maybe I don't know what the situation is, but he has struggled to replicate that success. He did get shot out of a cannon a little bit when he went to Calgary via trade. I think it was 14 goals in 29 games. So he kind of picked that scoring pace back up. He did get shot out of a cannon, like I said. and then his first full season in Calgary this year, it kind of dropped back off, and it's one of those interesting cases.
I would need to see his first half of that season numbers versus his second half of the season numbers to really further the point I was going to make about it. But it
Okay,
feels like the shit.
Are you talking
in
about like his any
in
deeper
Vancouver.
numbers or just his counting stats?
No, just normal.
The full year in Vancouver. Okay.
The first one, yes.
Okay.
That rookie season with
that second year, it was 13. It was 21 points in 43 games, and it's not good enough.
Right, but I'm saying in that first year because there's a pretty clear cut that first year. You know, I forget how many games it would have been, 44, 45, I guess, before a coaching change was made. And so to me, the thing in Vancouver was the style that Rick Tocchet wants to play did not work with him. And you made the coaching change. You went from Boudreau to Tocchet. And I think that it started there, but he was having a good enough year that you couldn't take him out. And then the next year, things were different. Everything's new because it's the first full year under Tocchet, and then he was moved.
He wasn't a scheme fit for them.
Well, and then he was moved. And then in Calgary, I think everything in Calgary was there were too many guys who were probably in front of him at the time. Yeah. You know, you're talking about a team that just at that point in time was not too far removed from the deal with, okay, so Matthew Tkachuk goes to Florida, Huberdeau comes back, Weegar comes out, and Weegar's not even a forward. I get that, but it's like you start shuffling everything because it's like, and now that we have Huberdeau, we're going to go do this and we're going to go do that. Like that's how Blake Coleman comes on board. Blake Coleman's probably higher in the lineup than Kuzmenko is.
Brad Treliving really left that Calgary team in shambles a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't great, right?
A bit, yeah. But either way, we got a good deal out of it, right? The Flyers do also pick up a second-round pick in the trade. Obviously, the second isn't a whole lot. Danny Briere mentioned it as a shot, basically. A lottery pick, right?
Yeah.
But you pick up some assets. You pick up some long-term cap flexibility. And if you're a fan of this team picking in the top 7 or 8, you made the current roster worse. Like all of these things are good tank moves, right? That don't, to your consistent point, that don't tear it all the way down.
Don't say that too loud.
What do you mean?
Don't use that word.
What's that?
The T word. The T word the T word that Torts loves.
What did I say?
You said tank.
I remember. Oh, the tank. Oh, yeah. Oh, they're tanking. And
no, I don't think they are though. Is the thing. I don't think they're deliberately doing it. Like they're not out there deliberately trying to lose a game, but their roster isn't great. That's all.
Well, exactly.
They're doing it. They're doing it the exact organic way that they should.
They're doing it the way that we have always talked about. The players are trying their hardest. The coach is trying his hardest. The general manager has to. Well, typically,
when you don't have to admit a week later that after this guy got pulled because he was going to be traded and all that stuff, I probably should have played one of the better players on the roster in the third period but no, I benched him because I benched him.
But he admitted it and showed some growth. And
I appreciate that.
Right. I'm not saying John Tortorella is a perfect person. I'm not saying John Tortorella is a perfect head coach. But I think pretty much every night he goes out there and tries his best to put together a winning roster.
Right.
The GM has to take toys away. And you took toys away, right? You took Farabee and Frost off the roster, and you gave back 2 players that aren't quite as good right now. Obviously, Pelletier is still kind of a developing up-and-coming player. And
and I find him to be the most intriguing part of the deal to a degree. Like, yes, you get the flexibility, and I understand the flexibility is important for what you decide to do in the future, and that's all well and good. If you want me to take it, if you wanted me to take a tangible piece from this deal that you're going to get to see now or soon. Unfortunately now, apparently 2 weeks later, but it is what it is. But you get 25 games of a 23-year-old who's an RFA that you get to see what he's got. And by all accounts, but like, I'm going to tell you right now, and I don't know, this is probably a better question, a question that should be meant for Danny Briere down the line. But I wonder if Briere sees a little bit of himself as a player in Pelletier, who's all of 5'9" and is apparently described as a guy who goes to all of those areas and is physical.
See,
And
is he 5'9"? Because Elite Prospects has him listed at 5'11". Now they might
no,
be lying.
the one I got said 5'9".
Okay.
Everything I got said 5'9".
He weighs 180 pounds and he's from Quebec. So I assume Danny Briere sees a little bit of himself. Well, is he going to let him wear 48 or?
Well, he's already got a number, so he's not that. He's 20.
I'm
He's
joking,
22.
Yeah, I can change next year. He can show up to camp with 48 on. But overall,
By the way, you saw Morgan Frost shed that number really quickly, right?
What's he supposed to do?
Well, he could have kept it.
But he only.
I'm saying he got to a new location.
For Danny Briere, the guy who traded him.
Well, no, he couldn't wear his junior number either. Let's be clear about that.
Okay.
His junior number was 16. You kind of can't use that one here.
No.
No kidding.
No
kidding.
Out of bounds.
Right.
But regardless, I think you did a decent job here of moving out some pieces that weren't going to be on your roster long term. You got some okay future pieces back. You got some long-term cap flexibility. Like I said, I think this is a really nice, tidy piece of business out of Danny Briere.
Yeah, it's a start. It's a place to get this thing started where there's more that can be done.
Well, so just flipping to our other tab here real quick, do you think anything else is going to be done in the season here? The tab references the trade deadline. If you're not watching on our YouTube channel, check us out at YWT Podcast. Subscribe over there, hit the like button. But the tab references the trade deadline. We've mentioned Ristolainen, we've mentioned Lawton. What do you think the chances one or both of those guys is moved by the March 7th deadline?
I think that the chances are probably higher on Ristolainen than Lawton because I think that I don't think again, you're going to like players like that. If they have value to somebody else, then you're going to like what they bring to you currently.
Of course.
It's, I think the possibility, I think there's a clear cut, just based on the way you just made the move that you did. There's a clear cut message on a guy who's making $5 million for multiple years after this season. And you kind of know now with Michkov and with maybe a little bit more than that, honestly, with Michkov, with the possibility that Lachenko's a full-timer next year, if they want to go that direction with some of the other things. I mean, if you really want to fast track with what you still need, then you need cap space. So whatever contracts you can free up. Like this and it goes back to, this kind of goes back to, like I was trying to tell, like I was saying, to me, there's only, if they move the Ristolainen contract and don't retain on that either, then to me,
I don't think they can. I don't think you retain on that deal if at all possible.
No, what you try to do is, if you do that, you end up asking for something, or you take something back that you just have for the rest of the year. Yep. That makes the money work until you get to the off season, and then that's that, and balance it out. But to me, they don't have another, like, I understand they have contracts that are rich, but I don't think they have what could be categorized as truly bad contracts, except for really two. The Ellis deal is one, because Ellis is just not playing.
Is the other one Couturier?
Yes.
Just given what you're getting out of him,
because
at this point.
Because with all due respect, no, the injuries have just taken their toll, and with all due respect, like, he wasn't a great skater to begin with, and now he's even worse.
That's the timing on those injuries. I'm not going to say that the timing on the deal was bad. The timing on the injuries was bad.
Well, sure, because the timing on the deal was what it was. Let's be real. Everybody reacted when that deal was made. It was, well, there's your number one center. He's pretty well fresh off of Selke, and he's
your captain forever. He's going to be your captain.
Probably, and
we knew at the time. Yeah.
Well, I know. By the way, you just gave him a contract for less than $8 million per year in a time when it wasn't moving anywhere. It was like, well, that's great. And
if now we were sitting at, if Sean Couturier is not injured and he is Selke winning 75-point Sean Couturier like he was consistently before those injuries, we're sitting here going, in 3 years the cap's going to be 115 million, and he's making 8, and we are laughing all the way.
Well, yeah, you know what else
Yep.
you're doing at that point? Then if he was still playing at that level, then you're putting Travis Konechny on one side and you're putting Michkov on the other side and saying, "Have at it, boys."
Yep. And hopefully
But he
you
doesn't.
come out of this decade with at least one ring, frankly.
But he's not that player, and because he's not that player, the contract then becomes what it becomes. You know what I mean? But I don't see it, especially with because you sent it to me right away, and I had seen it already by the time you'd sent it. But the progression of what it could go up next year, what it could go up 2 years from now, what it could go up 3 years from now, the possibility, and there's a scenario where
low end projections.
Right, I was gonna say there's a scenario where we're just scratching the surface with those totals. I don't think it's going. It
could be closer to 120 by the end of the.
Well, I don't think it's going up any more or less than what they've projected for the first year of that. Like, I think the 7.5 is pretty solidified.
I've heard rumors that it might trickle up towards 97 as opposed to the 95.5.
Okay, but that's not anything as substantial as going from 113 at the end of this to 120. Let's just say.
I think if the first number comes in higher, I think that sets the stage for the other two numbers to be.
I think it's to me. I think it's already high. I think it's already higher than expected. So it's.
Well, and something that has been floated around, there is nothing concrete on it, is if they expand again, if they pump 2, 3, 4 more expansion fees in at 1.5 billion plus, the salary cap's going to go crazy in the next 10.
Man, I know what you're saying from that standpoint of it. I hope they don't.
Connor McDavid's going to be such a Maple Leaf.
Okay, guess what? Now I've got two things I hope not based on what you just said. Jeez. Because let's just like.
Well, it's okay because to free up the money, Austin Matthews is going to go be a Bruin.
Oh, I didn't need that visual today.
And neither did the Leafs fans. Don't worry.
I'm sure. Well, okay. So for one, let's just like to start with your first point on that one, because the reason why I'm going to be pretty hard against the expansion thing going forward, because I got
happen whether you're against it or not, frankly.
Well, no, but the reason why I don't like it is because, I've only been saying for about a month and a half that half the teams in the league suck. We're going to add to that.
Fair.
Half is being generous. Half is being generous.
And you know that if they add 4 more teams, we're getting a play-in round.
Which I think is also just
So here's the thing. Here's what I want. If you're gonna add a round to the playoffs, I think it needs to be a one-off.
One game?
1 game series.
No, not a chance.
I know they'll do at least a best of 3. I know.
Yeah, if they go anywhere that direction, they're going to model it after the Calder Cup playoffs and try to do because that builds. Well, it builds over time. I think.
I think it's 3. I think it's 3, 5, 7, 7.
Exactly, and I think they would start to explore stuff like that. I don't know.
And there's no way the NHL ever knocks the first round down to 5 games. There's no way.
No. No way.
No. But you would add either
because there's a charm
5-round play-in.
Because there's a charm to and here's the other thing you got to weigh about that. Then if you're adding something like that, then you either need to shorten the preseason to 4 games or cut the regular season partially, because there's I'm sorry, if we are starting to approach the territory of, by doing something like that the Stanley Cup is being given out and it's 4th of July weekend because of that, I wish I could say I was joking, but I'm not, because
here's the thing.
If you're adding it,
if they started September 24th, they'd be fine. But they don't.
That's the other alternative.
They don't want to go against football for that long. I'm convinced that's why they don't start earlier, because they don't want to go against the first 4 weeks of the regular season in the NFL.
But I don't know. I almost don't understand what good that does you, other than to have the playoffs be right. Other than to put the playoffs in a spot where the only other thing that would be on otherwise, other than yes, you're aligned with basketball, is that baseball started.
Yep.
And even then, it's early enough that it's you're not into that.
Right. And
postseason realm yet.
quite frankly, May, June, it's a lot of skippable baseball. Let's be honest.
It can be. It can be. I get that, but I'm saying,
Right. But
I just don't see them sacrificing anything. Like I still think that I still think one of the things that everybody likes is the integrity of 4 7 game series
I agree.
to get to the finish line. And then if you start to add to that because you want to bring more teams into the picture, it's like you can't start where you start the playoffs and then expect to be done by June 23rd or whatever it is. It's never
No,
going to happen.
they would have to start earlier and or cut the preseason, and it would probably have to be a best of three.
And
Do it all in the same
well,
city.
I think I still I think you're right about that part of it. I think that would still be the case. I just think that
Right.
there's no way you can add that to the other parts of it and not have to sacrifice something somewhere short
I
of
agree.
we're playing in July. Like
Right. Well, and they're not sacrificing their 2 week
I
break in
think it's already
February.
I think it's already ridiculous that they basically had the thing end and then 3 days later it was, hey, by the way, Florida, screw your parade. You got to
Oh,
draft in 48 hours.
and oh, by the way, free agency is 3 days after that. Right.
Exactly.
No,
I think that's
it's insane.
nuts.
It's insane.
Well, your only other alternative there is that you push all that back and you say that
Well,
starts later.
and the best part is everybody's favorite scheduling block is actually upon us. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, the Flyers break started yesterday. There are a couple of NHL games today, and then the Four Nations break starts tomorrow. So we do also have a little bit of a preview on that.
Yeah,
Kevin,
one of the big.
we chit chatted beforehand, and frankly, you don't seem particularly interested.
No, like, am I interested in watching? Yes. Am I gonna like sit there and do something for every single game? No. I mean,
Fair enough.
there's now there's 3 Flyers participating. If we're really
Yep.
being honest with ourselves,
With
like now,
Rasmus, and as mentioned earlier, we're recording this on Super Bowl Sunday. As we record, it was broken, I believe, last night that Rasmus Ristolainen will not be participating.
no, so it was
Um,
official. It was official
yeah.
today.
Oh, okay,
It
okay.
was it was that he didn't. He was supposed to be a game time decision for Saturday's game. Did not play, obviously, and that's obviously sparked the possibility that could he be replaced if he's not able to. Obviously, he's not able to, or at least at the beginning. So there's no sense because it's an interesting tournament because everybody gets to play over the course of was it 3 games each over 4 days is what it is or something like that or
It's a round robin. So you play the other three teams, and then the two best teams will go to a gold medal game. So you can play
right
three
because
or
it's
four games.
well so it's no it's right because it's one game. There's only one game on Wednesday, one game on Thursday. Everybody plays Saturday, everybody plays Monday, and then that determines the 2 teams that are going to
Gold
play for the
medal.
championship on the Thursday.
Thursday, I think. Yeah.
And then the whole thing's over.
Yep.
And part of the gap, by the way, I believe is what is it's Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday is in Montreal, and then it shifts, and the last part of the round robin and the championship is in Boston, I
In
believe is what it
Boston,
is.
something like that. Yeah. Yeah, and as we were talking about beforehand, listen, frankly, Team Finland has gotten a little bit decimated as far as injuries go.
Yeah, I mean that really started with the Heiskanen thing.
It's kind of unfortunate because I think there are only like 9 Finnish defensemen in the league. They got 6 of them, 2 got hurt. Like, it's wild. There's only one defenseman in the league who has played games and is not getting an invite. And I can't remember who it is. It might be Henry Jokiharju, or maybe he just got
No,
invited.
he got at it
He got
already, I
invited.
thought.
Okay.
They're down to
Regardless,
like
there's
I'm gonna
yeah.
pull the thing up for who's replacing Ristolainen because
Okay.
the number of NHL games the guy has played is
Ugh.
like crazy.
Yeah.
So
So in a tournament, and while you're looking that up, in a tournament where the rosters are as stacked as this, that's probably enough to take Team Finland out of it. Frankly,
it's gonna hurt.
it's right. It's kind of a 3-horse race. I think Team USA is probably the best overall team. Canada has some goaltending issues, but a ton of talent up front. Sweden has maybe some goaltending questions of their own, but a ton of talent as well. It's a
Depends. I
3-horse
think I think
race.
I think
Yeah.
Sweden's goaltending with Gustafsson is going to be okay because I don't think Gustafsson's had any problems. Olmark obviously had some injury stuff. Ericsson's had some history, has had some injury stuff. So like it's
It's also a 4-game tournament, or a 3
three
or
to
4
four.
game tournament. So teams may be a little quick to pull some triggers on your goalies just because there's not a whole lot of room for
Well,
error.
I gotta gather that that Gustafsson's probably getting a bulk of what matters there. I don't know.
Quite
Would they
frankly,
do?
out of every goalie in the tournament, Gustafsson probably has the longest leash.
Well, I also don't know. Would they give each guy one game, or do you lean
So
heavier into?
I think Gustafson's your starter. If he
Well, yeah, I know.
looks if he looks good, you run him. If he doesn't look good, you try somebody else. I think it's as simple as that. But regardless, I think it's kind of a 3-horse race. I think it's going to end up being a U.S. Sweden final. But I think U.S. Canada might be the best game of the tournament in the round robin. Obviously,
I
there's a lot of socio-political stuff going on that we're not going to dive too much into. There's anthem booing on both sides. There's a lot going on. There's going to be a lot of heat in that game. It's in Montreal. They're going to hand out 20,000 flags. It's on a Saturday night. Like it's going to be fiery. It's going to be a lot of fun. That is the game. I'm going to try to check out the whole tournament, of course, but that is the game that is absolutely appointment television for me.
the U.S. Canada one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I got you there. Usually it always is, but yeah, that's probably the one.
That one's heated.
So
Yeah, and
so the
especially because for
defense,
a lot
the
of these
defenseman,
guys, this is the first international tournament since the World Cup. Best on
yes.
best. So like
Well, and as everybody has hinted to as well, like it's a precursor for the next time
it's
the
a
Olympics roll around. That like
it's an
yes,
audition. Absolutely.
right. You're
Next
trying to
year.
yes.
It's a year away. Like that's it.
Well,
Like
right,
this
but
is
because it's going to
the
be the first
audition.
one in a long time that they've had the NHL participation, it's like yeah.
That's what I'm
So
saying. And a lot of times your audition is like the world championships, but most of these players are on playoff teams and don't get to
the
play the world
the
championships.
defenseman who is
Yeah.
taking Ristolainen's place has played 18 NHL games this year.
Oh no. What's the name?
Of the defenseman,
Yeah. I thought you were gonna
Nicholas
mention it.
Nicholas Matinpalo, I think is how
Oh,
you say his
okay.
name. Is that who it is? I haven't even
I
heard of
didn't
this guy.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot with a Finnish name.
No, I did. No, I did see that. Ville Heinola is the only one who hasn't or who has
That
played NHL games who isn't on the or wasn't
man,
named to it. I forgot
imagine
about
getting passed up. Imagine getting passed up for a guy with
I had
18
forgotten
games.
about because now Risto's the third one who's dropped apparently with
Mm-hmm.
injury. I forgot about Hakanpää.
Yeah,
That's the other one who's out.
crazy. But yeah, I think the tournament's going to be fun. It seems like, from what I've heard, it seems like the players are pretty bought in. Matthew Tkachuk is fired up. Connor McDavid's fired up. Sidney Crosby's going to try to play, potentially going to try to play through some injury to play in this tournament. It like, and the thing about the internationals is that if you can get the players to buy in, it's going to be a good tournament.
Sure, of course, and it's
Right. They've talked about, we've heard from a couple of different guys like, hey, this isn't an all-star game. Like we're going out here with our country on our chest. Like this is real. This matters to us.
mhm.
And if that's the case, if we get maybe not Olympic level intensity, let's be honest, but if we get real intensity out of these
Well,
games, this is going to be a
the
fun
thing.
tournament.
Well, and that was the thing that John Tortorella was saying because he like of course like Eriksson wasn't named to the Swedish roster right away. He's on there as an injury replacement also, and like Torts is sitting there saying, "Of course, I would rather him have like from selfishly, I'd rather him have the break than go play more, but it's an honor, so
Yep.
go do it. Of course, not going
And
to
he
stand in
is
the way of
indeed,
that."
yep, he is indeed taking that break.
Even
So
even if Torts didn't remember that in the moment after last night's game,
I know. So we
that was funny.
have Konechny and Sanheim going for Team Canada,
Yep.
and Sam Ersson going as probably the third goalie for Team Sweden. Unlikely to see on the ice, but it will still be a good experience for him just to go rub elbows with the international, scene. But yeah, Sanheim and Konechny are both real roster members on Canada. They're expected to play. Travis Konechny might end up in their top six, depending on how their lines shake out. He's a real member of that team, and I think it's going to be fun to watch. There are no Flyers games for the next couple weeks. And while I'm here, I did also want to mention that we are probably skipping next week's show as well. We've
Hmm.
mentioned the fact that this Four Nations tournament is it's a nice little break opportunity. We both have a lot going on.
Hmm.
Obviously, the Super Bowl later today, so we might be partying for 2 weeks straight. Um, and
It is a little bit of a unique kind of situation this time around
yeah,
because I was thinking back to the other two times that they've been to a Super Bowl and I've gone down both times previously. I was at a game the night before, um, or day before, depending on what the situation. I think actually they were both of the other ones were afternoon games, ironically.
mhm.
Um, well, actually, the last 2 years ago they played Super Bowl Sunday too. The Flyers
They
did. They
did
had
it.
a
They did in 2018 too.
no, they didn't in 18. That was the Saturday before they did, but not on the Sunday because the Sunday they try to knock out every sport knocks out all the games
Okay.
before the kickoff.
Yeah, and I thought they played the Washington Capitals midday.
Nope, not that day.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Um,
No, because believe me, I went back and looked because one of the things I was
okay.
actually curious about was is that so when they won the Super Bowl all those years ago, I was trying to figure out whether or not, and to be honest, I don't even know if I was going down to every game at the time, but when was the next home game afterwards? Because obviously, like no sooner did I show up last night and people start to get into the building and it was already going. I mean,
Right.
you're an hour and a half from puck drop and people are already with the chants and they played it up. Obviously, like just about everything break and play wise was dealing with that a little bit, you know. So of course, and it was and it was already it's like the pregame of it all, right? Like it's like being there is it's like being at an indoor tailgate that people are down there and having a ball with it and having and just going with that because that's where their heads are at more than anything. And I remember it being the same way leading up to both games before, but I was trying to remember like when they lost 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, the Flyers then went on a long road trip anyway. So they
Oh,
wouldn't have been home for a while. Like they were 2 weeks or whatever. I think by the time they came home, it was 12 days after the Super Bowl had been played.
oh, okay.
When the Eagles won the Super Bowl all those years ago, though, they were home like the Thursday after, and I think the parade was like the day or two before that.
Jesus.
So no, so in this case, you get this big, massive 2 week break of not they don't even
Almost two
play.
weeks. Right.
You know, so like there's almost a slight element of that if there's a high after all this, that it almost
A
does give you
fade.
that it almost comes down that, like by that point anyway, because it's going to be so long afterwards that there won't even be anything. Now, because like perfect example, right? To go to the Super Bowl like they are. The Flyers played the day after that game. So what happens? Oh, there's players here. Cooper DeJean's riding the Zamboni in between periods. The place is going crazy as soon as they realize, oh,
Hilarious.
look who's up there.
Yeah,
This is fun.
hilarious.
You know, and so it like that's vibes incredibly high because you just watched it the day before.
Absolutely.
There's a huge gap this time around, and it's not even as short term as like, oh well, we'll see you next Thursday or something. No, like
Right. We'll
this
be
is
home Saturday.
right. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, 11 days from now or whatever it is. Right.
Yeah, by that point, it's like by that point that's full off season mode for the NFL.
All right. Obviously, most people are going to listen to this show after the Super Bowl, but I still want a prediction from you, Kevin. What do you got for me?
I'm not doing scores with you.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm not
Listen.
doing scores, but I'll tell you the thing that I've had in my head for several days that I think is what it comes down to.
Okay.
I think we're sitting there holding our breath over a kick at the end.
31-17 Birds.
Wow. I mean, I would appreciate if that's the way it goes, but
I I think it will be a better football game if it is the one score sweating out a kick game that you describe. I
I
don't
think
see
they're
it.
I think they're lining up a 37-yarder to win the game with 3 seconds left. That's just me.
I think this feels like Tampa going for their third straight cup, where they're just kind of out of gas and they just come a little bit short in that third series. I just don't. Who knows? All right, that is a good place to put it. We will be doing our next. We will be doing our next show probably in 2 weeks, unless there are some pretty big trades. We may be back with a show in the meantime, but we will probably be back in 2 weeks. We'll be kind of back into the swing of things. We'll have a Flyers game to talk about. It's an Edmonton Oilers game. We're not going to preview it. It's in 2 weeks, and we'll be back for the last little bit of. Hey, it's Connor McDavid.
It's Connor McDavid. Thanks.
They're going to win. Okay.
Yes.
So that'll do it for us here today. Make sure you're following us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso everywhere except for Blue Sky, where it's just at Kevin Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Like I mentioned a couple times throughout the show, make sure you're subscribing to that YouTube channel. Hit the like button over there. Share it with your friends. It really helps us out. We're trying to get it spread the word. So until then, 2 weeks. Go Birds. We'll see you.